It's time to eat.
What are you hungry for?
Sit down and get ready to consume an abundance of fantasy football knowledge from Ross Tucker and Joe Dolan.
Feed me now. I'm starving.
On the Fantasy Feast Eatin' Podcast.
Yeah, let's eat, baby. It is the Fantasy Feast Eatin' Podcast. It's, of course, presented by DraftKings. I'm Ross Tucker, former NFL offensive lineman, 5 teams over the course of 7 years. Long time ago now at this point, retired 15 years ago. But ever since then, a bunch of media gigs, got a bunch of podcasts. Kerry Collins, by the way, fantastic on today's Ross Tucker football podcast. Make sure you check that out. I'm sure Kerry had some pretty good fantasy seasons back in the day. I know he put up a lot of numbers over his 17-year career. You can check me out on social media. Love when you do, at Ross Tucker NFL, as well as the show at Ross Tucker Pod. And reminder, we're doing a best ball draft next week. And I'm beyond fired up about it at DraftKings. I'm just telling you right now, there's still like 4 or 5 spots left. I got to check. The first 4 or 5 people that take advantage of any of the sponsors on the sponsor page at rosstucker.com or get the free estimate at westshorehome.com/Ross and send it to me, Ross at rosstucker.com. You're in. You're in the best ball draft against me and Joe next week. It's a live draft. Going to be awesome. Make sure, as soon as you're done listening to this, take advantage of a sponsor, Game Time app, whatever. Send it to me, Ross at rosstucker.com. First come, first serve at this point. Speaking of first come, first serve, there's nobody better than Joe Dolan. At FG_Dolan on social media. The website that he's a co-owner of, fantasypoints.com, is just incredible. It really is. I highly, highly recommend you go there, you sign up for a membership, a subscription, use the code 23FEAST so you actually get a discount and they know that we sent you over there. And next week, Joe, will be all about best ball stuff. But last week, wrapped up the mini camps, wrapped up the OTAs. And as we always say during the preseason and during training camp, there are nuggets of information out there, Joe, to be mined that can be very valuable come draft time.
For sure. I mean, look, the thing you don't want to do is overreact too much, but you don't want to underreact. You just want to know what's going on. I think the right term, Ross, is you want to have your ear to the ground. And just keep understanding that if that drumbeat continues throughout preseason, training camp and preseason, that there is plenty that you can learn from these. There's guys we are not going to be talking about. I say this every single year, and I'm going to say it again. It's especially true at the running back position, but there are guys who we are not talking about in June. And there's guys who we will not talk about in July and August who are going to make a fantasy football impact this season. It has happened every single year, and it is going to happen this year. But people who are there at training camp, people who are there at OTAs, they know about these players. And they're going to tell you about these players, maybe subtly. They're not going to write an article sometimes maybe that says, oh, X guy that you have never heard of is going to have a breakout season. It doesn't always come like that, but sometimes you have to put the pieces together. And that doesn't mean you're going to be taking this guy in the 9th round of your draft in August, but it might mean that, hey, oh, this player got 6 catches in week 1. I have to pick him up off the waiver wire. And if you understand that there have been a steady drumbeat about these players since May, since June, then it's going to put you ahead of your league mates. There's no doubt about that.
So, Joe, this week we're going to focus on the AFC. Next week we'll focus on the NFC because there's a lot of news and notes out there that we need to get into. I will say this, just a little plug for fantasypoints.com. Man, they have a terrific summary that will be more in-depth and have more information than what Joe and I will talk through on today's show. So again, go over to fantasypoints.com. Use that code 23FEAST. You will be very, very happy that you did so. Let's get, Joe, before we get to the AFC, though, we did have a transaction yesterday, so it's fresh. So let's discuss it. The Rams signed Sony Michel back in LA, or I guess still in LA, just back with a different team. Should we care? Do we care? Does it matter?
No. And I think that's a good thing. If the Rams, the beat writers were saying, they were looking for a veteran backup to Cam Akers. And I think if you've been investing in Cam Akers, who to me still looks like one of the best values in early drafts, we had that podcast a month or 2 months ago talking about boring running backs and how they ended up being the kind of league winners in 2022. I think in 2023, there is still a tier of running backs who are getting undervalued in some early drafts and early best ball drafts. And I think Cam Akers is part of that. If you are a believer in Cam Akers at his current ADP, which I think is too affordable, that the Rams signing Sony Michel as opposed to somebody like Dalvin Cook is great news. Because if they're like, all right, we're going to sign Sony Michel, who can be a grinder, who can handle a couple of carries if we need to give him a couple of carries, can handle goal line work, when we're trying to put a game away, I think that's really good news for Cam Akers. Because Sony Michel isn't anything more than a guy at this point. And, he could barely get on the field last year with the Chargers. I think it's great news if you're into Cam Akers at his current ADP, which I am.
Let's dive into some of the stuff with some of these different teams. I guess the question is, Joe, with the Buffalo Bills, is the Stefon Diggs issue, we'll call it, is that fantasy relevant?
Yes and no. I still have him as a first rounder, but I did a couple of drafts yesterday where I drew the 7th pick in the draft. Just happened back to back that I drew the 7th pick, and Stefon Diggs was on the board, and I opted for AJ Brown in both of them. And I don't know what your read on this situation is, Ross. I don't know if I have one. I guess Diggs was upset maybe about a coaching change in terms of his wide receiver coach, Chad Hall. He felt disrespected. It's not money related. So what is it? Like, it's a weird situation where I can't sit here and say, oh, they're just going to fix it with more money. Like the Lamar Jackson situation was fixed with more money. They're not going to trade him because it'd be a pretty huge cap hit, and they'd be completely strapped at the wide receiver position because they don't have anybody else. So Stefon Diggs has leverage, but what does he want? I don't know what he wants. I guess they talk through it. It's fine now. This is one of the more bizarre situations. What is your read on this situation, Ross?
Yeah, I guess he's not happy with some of the play calling and the direction of the offense. My personal favorite is when people say he just wants to win so badly, like as if all the other guys don't give a crap about whether or not they win. I mean, give me a break. For our purposes, for fantasy purposes, Joe, it's not going to mean less targets. So I know he's not going to get less targets out of this deal. Let's keep it in the AFC East, and let's talk a little Breece Hall. Everybody gets these glowing reports, I feel like, about their rehab and their injury and their progress, to the point, Joe, where if anything's ever slower than you think it's going to be, or a guy's not still on the field, if it's not glowing doesn't stand out to me, Joe. Anything less than glowing stands out to me.
Yeah, they think he's going to be ready for week 1. They have no reason to push him, but this continues to bring to mind the fact that the Jets have had interest in other running backs this offseason. And I think the most notable one was from the NFL draft, where the Detroit Lions took Jahmyr Gibbs in the first round, which shocked everybody. And then we heard reports after the draft that the Jets were going to take Jahmyr Gibbs. That is, I don't want to say that it means that they're down on Breece Hall. I think maybe they just thought they had an opportunity to get a game-changing player in Gibbs. But the fact that Breece Hall still isn't ready, he's coming off an ACL, does make this a little bit problematic in my mind. Maybe they drafted Izzy Abanikanda in the 5th round. That teams draft running backs on day 3 all the time, so I'm not going to say that that's a huge deal, but I just want to, if I'm drafting Breece Hall right now, I haven't done a ton of it. He's getting drafted in the 3rd round. If they don't add a running back by the time camp breaks, then I'll be a lot more comfortable drafting Breece Hall. He apparently had just a standard ACL tear as opposed to what Javonte Williams had and as opposed to what J.K. Dobbins had 2 years ago, which is good news, but they could still take it easy with Breece Hall, who, by the way, was tracking to be the rookie of the year before he got hurt.
He was fantastic.
He was.
But also remember, most guys aren't as good until the 2nd year after they come back from a torn ACL. Just really, really hard to have that same level of explosion. So I'll be looking forward to that, just like I'll be looking forward to some Labatt Blue Lights all weekend with my friends and family, living life to the power of we. Nothing's better than doing a best ball draft like Joe and I will do with some of you next week, drinking Labatt Blue Lights. Always enjoy responsibly. Beer, Labatt USA, Buffalo, New York. Joe, let's move on to the AFC North, because I've got not one but 2 interesting things out of Baltimore. Number one, J.K. Dobbins is in a little bit of a contract issue here with the Ravens. Played very well towards the end of the year. You gotta take me through the J.K. Dobbins thing again, Joe. Because like early in the year, he didn't look like the same guy. He wasn't playing as much. Then Lamar's out towards the end of the year. Dobbins looked really good. And I don't blame him for trying to get whatever money he can now while he can.
So this, I don't blame him at all. I just don't know if the Ravens are going to acquiesce. And this is going to be one of those things where we get into the age-old discussion of running back value and if running backs should be held to a different standard. Ultimately, I wonder if they, on a big picture level, if this is going to come to a boiling point soon with the position. That's more of an Andrew Brandt question. The thing about Dobbins was, if you're optimistic on him, the reasoning is simple. From weeks 3 to 6 last year, which were his first 4 games back from the injury, he averaged just 3.5 yards per carry, and he generated an explosive run on only 5.7% of his carries. But after that, he missed 6 games, needed a cleanup procedure on the same injured knee. But when he returned in week 14, he was a different player, Ross. He averaged 7.0 yards per carry and led the league over that span with a 12.3% explosive run rate. So J.K. Dobbins, not only was he good when he came back from that cleanup procedure, he was downright explosive. Now, we still had that hitch in his giddy-up. I think everybody's going to remember that long run he had against the Steelers where it looked like he was kind of dragging his knee behind him. He looked like Greg Jennings in that Madden video, but he still was generating those explosive runs. Right now, I have J.K. Dobbins well ahead of markets, but the fact that he is holding in is interesting to me. I don't blame him whatsoever. The Ravens are probably sitting here saying, dude, and I mean, I'm just trying to, I support J.K. Dobbins trying to get his money, but the Ravens are probably sitting here saying, you gave us 4 good games. Like, you got to show us a little bit more. Maybe he just doesn't want to get hurt again. He wants to maximize his earning potential. But I ultimately, I think Dobbins is going to be suiting up for the Ravens come week 1. Whether or not he gets more money, I think the Ravens probably want to see a little bit more of him before they give him more money. I am currently still ahead of markets on J.K. Dobbins right now. I was very encouraged by how he ended the season. I'm very encouraged by the reports that Todd Monken, the new offensive coordinator, wants to involve the running backs more in the passing game this year. I mean, the Raven running backs basically did nothing in the passing game. Gus Edwards didn't even catch a single pass last year. So I think that's good news for J.K. Dobbins' fantasy outlook, but in a very interesting situation. When I saw that he wasn't practicing, I was initially very concerned. I'm like, uh-oh, we know this guy had a severe knee injury. But the fact that he's basically just holding out for more money was actually encouraging to me. We don't want guys holding out, but I'd rather that than J.K. Dobbins being injured.
What about Lamar Jackson saying he's gonna run less, throw more? Is that good for his fantasy, Joe? Doesn't seem like it.
Well, we have to keep in mind what Lamar Jackson has done for fantasy the last couple of years. And he frankly hasn't been great. He's finished as a top 10 fantasy quarterback in just in less than half of his starts over the last 2 seasons. He's accounted over the last 2 seasons, which is 24 regular season starts, for just 33 touchdown passes and 5 rushing touchdowns. Now, keep in mind, when he won the MVP in 2019, he accounted for 43 touchdowns alone in that season. So there was something broken about the Greg Roman offense. So I don't really care about Lamar Jackson running less. First and foremost, Lamar Jackson's never going to be Phillip Rivers, okay? He's never going to be somebody who's going to stand in the pocket and run for 12 yards in a season. That's not his game. And I wouldn't expect Todd Monken to do that. But what the differences in this offense, to me, are a positive because they were too tight to the formation. They were too predictable. Todd Monken's going to spread things out. He's going to create more throwing lanes for Lamar. He's going to create more running lanes for J.K. Dobbins. And I think he's going to create more running lanes for Lamar Jackson. Yeah, okay, so maybe he doesn't run for 1,200 yards. We don't need him to run for 1,200 yards. I need more touchdowns from the Baltimore Ravens. And Lamar Jackson has just 33 touchdown passes over the last 2 seasons. That is not enough for anybody, even a running quarterback like Lamar. He's not Jalen Hurts. He's not that bull at the goal line who's going to be their goal line back. So we need more touchdowns in general. I am optimistic about the Ravens' new offense. I'm still not sure how optimistic we should be about this receiving core. I mean, it's different. They certainly made some moves, but Rashad Bateman's still hurt. Odell Beckham hasn't played in over a year. Zay Flowers is a rookie. So I think it's still fair to be skeptical about the Ravens receiving group, but there's no doubt they've made some needed changes. And I'm more optimistic about this offense than I was the last 2 years under Greg Roman.
Let's talk about a couple tight ends. We don't talk about tight ends that often, Joe, but a lot of love this spring for Irv Smith in Cincinnati and Greg Dulcich in Denver. You know, I'm a best ball guy. You know, which guy would be a better pick for me? I know we're going against each other next week, but in best ball, in your mind, to take a flyer on Dulcich or Smith?
Dulcich by far for me. I think Irv Smith is going to be your classic touchdown dependent tight end to me. I'm talking like a good season for him would be like 45 catches and 6 touchdowns, which, by the way, I mean, those guys are useful for fantasy, especially DFS or off the waiver wire. But I think Dulcich has an opportunity to be more of a go-to guy with Denver. And here's the thing about Denver. We look at their receivers. Oh, they got Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy. Courtland Sutton hasn't been good in like 3 years. And Jerry Jeudy, as much as I like him, and I'm drafting Jerry Jeudy this year, by the way, at his ADP, has never been great for fantasy. It's just more been an idea of him. Oh, he's this great route runner who always gets open, but he never gets the ball. Because of quarterbacks, because he's dropping the ball, because he's hurt, whatever the reason, he doesn't get the ball as much as we think he should, based on his route running proficiency. So I look at Greg Dulcich and I look at Sean Payton and the way he utilized a guy like Jimmy Graham. And I'm not saying Greg Dulcich is Jimmy Graham. Jimmy Graham was a freak of freaks at his peak. But I look at that and look, if I'm asking myself a question, 99th percentile outcome for Greg Dulcich and Irv Smith. Irv Smith doesn't have, he's his team's best receiver in his range of outcomes. Because they have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. The only way Irv Smith is his team's best receiver is if those guys suffer catastrophic injuries. Greg Dulcich has that in his range of outcomes. Because, again, Courtland Sutton hasn't been great in a number of years, and Jerry Jeudy still has not taken that step to Pro Bowl, all-pro level wide receiver. So Greg Dulcich, to me, has a much higher ceiling in his range of outcomes than Irv Smith. So I'm more excited about Greg Dulcich. He's only going a couple of tight end spots ahead of Irv Smith. I like Greg Dulcich more than a couple of guys who were going ahead of him, like Dalton Schultz, who's just kind of a chain mover. Cole Kmet's going ahead of him. I think I like Dulcich more than him. So Greg Dulcich is one of my favorite targets at the tight end position right now.
Joe, best ball on DraftKings, bigger than ever, with $10 million in guaranteed cash prizes up for grabs. For a limited time, you can join DraftKings' largest best ball contest ever. Get your first entry back in DraftKings dollars as soon as the draft is finished. What are you waiting for? Head to the DraftKings app, sign up with code Ross, and start playing best ball today. Join the DraftKings $10 million best ball tournament, and you'll get your first entry back in DraftKings dollars only on DraftKings with code Ross. And remember, take advantage of any sponsor on the sponsor page at rosstucker.com, or click on the link in any social media post or on the bio. It'll take you to our sponsors. Take advantage of one ASAP. Forward me the email, ross@rosstucker.com. Joe and I want to take you guys down in best ball fantasy next week. Joe, what about what we're hearing from Jacksonville? Seems pretty clear they want to reduce Travis Etienne's workload, and also seems pretty clear that Calvin Ridley's looking pretty darn good.
The thing about Etienne is I don't care if they reduce his workload on the ground if they increase it through the air. I'll go to the old adage that our Scott Barrett has proven. In PPR fantasy, which DraftKings best ball is, by the way, a target is worth 2.5 times as much as a carry for a running back. I want Travis Etienne to catch more passes. He didn't catch more than 3 passes in any game last year. So if they drafted Tank Bigsby to handle some of that early down work and they're able to get Travis Etienne more work in the passing game, so be it. Now, you might be worried that they're not going to be able to get that to him, and then in which case you're going to argue that he's being overdrafted right now. Fair enough, but if Etienne gets fewer carries, sorry, Mom. If he gets fewer carries and more targets, I'm fine with them reducing his workload because I want more targets. I don't want him to be a grinder. I want him to be an explosive playmaker. Calvin Ridley's interesting. Calvin Ridley right now is going a round or two rounds ahead of Christian Kirk. And I've thought that hasn't made sense because we know Christian Kirk has had a big-time fantasy season with Trevor Lawrence. We don't know that Calvin Ridley has had one. Calvin Ridley hasn't played football in over a calendar year for obvious reasons, sponsored by DraftKings Sportsbook. And I still think he's one of the best receivers in football from a route running perspective, from a separation perspective. So I'm not against Calvin Ridley at his ADP. I just think Christian Kirk might be a little bit of a better value. The one guy I've been investing in here, though, has been Trevor Lawrence, who I think is fantastic, is a fantastic buy for fantasy. I would like to see him do a little bit more with his legs, but he had a fantastic second half of last year under Doug Peterson. He has an improved receiving core. He's got an improved backfield behind him. Maybe Travis Etienne can do more as a receiver, and then in which case Trevor Lawrence ends up being one of the best values at the quarterback position, though his ADP is getting juiced up right now. There's no doubt about that.
In about 45 seconds, Joe, there's a lot of hype coming out of Tennessee for both Tyjae Spears and Treylon Burks from the Titans. Which one of those, if any, are you buying?
Well, I'm buying Treylon Burks, and Spears is interesting just because you wonder how much of a shelf life he has because of the fact that he's had essentially there were medicals that he had no ACL in one of his knees because it's been injured, but the Titans weren't bothered. They took him in the 3rd round. He's more of a handcuff to me. Treylon Burks, look, Ryan Tannehill doesn't have right now. DeAndre Hopkins hasn't signed there yet. He hasn't signed anywhere. Ryan Tannehill doesn't have many options right now. So Treylon Burks is the guy I'm buying in Tennessee. He and Chig Okonkwo are both good buys, especially Okonkwo to me, because Tennessee doesn't have many options, and it's good to see that Treylon Burks is getting some hype.
I'm buying a subscription to fantasypoints.com using the code 23Feast. And thankfully, unlike you guys, I don't have to buy any sponsor code to be in the best ball draft. I'm already in it. Joe's in it. We want to go against you. There's nothing more fun than a best ball draft. Who wants in? You tell me. Send me the email, ross@rosstucker.com. Other than that, I'm stuffed. We're done.
Thanks for listening to the Fantasy Feast podcast. Make sure to also subscribe to the Ross Tucker Football Podcast, Even Money, Business of Sports, and the College Draft. All available at Apple Podcasts, rosstucker.com, or wherever podcasts can be found.